So as perhaps you know, in these Sundays we are pulling our themes from a song written by Matthew West called My Own Little World. And today I'm working off of a phrase from his second verse where he sings, "I try to stay awake during Sunday morning church." So, first off, if you've ever thought that you might be the only person in the world who has trouble staying awake in church, here's the good news. You're in good company. Even Matthew West has trouble with this. It's kind of reassuring to know that that's not only happened just to you. But this morning, there's an even deeper and more comforting yet message in this scripture passage. So try to stay awake with me. I don't know why we don't talk about this passage from Acts more often, because I really like it. This passage talks about how the Apostle Paul is just about getting ready to head off to Jerusalem to celebrate the Jewish festival of Pentecost. And so he and about 8 other traveling companions arrive in Troas, which is a city northeast of Athens in what is now modern-day Turkey. And Paul and his friends, they stay in this city for about a week. Then, on Sunday, Paul meets with the Christians there in that city for a meal and to have a discussion with them. You see, back then, early Christians still gathered for worship in synagogues, but they also gathered in homes, other times for food and prayer, and to discuss their faith with one another. They came together in this way to learn and to remember what Christians are called to do and to be reminded of the bigger picture, which I think is kind of like you and me. As Matthew West sings, what if there's a bigger picture? What if I'm missing out? What if there's a greater purpose I could be living right now outside my own little world? Don't want to miss out. But now, I don't know if you noticed in this scripture passage from Acts that there were 2, I think, very scary things that happened. The first one is that these people were trapped in a room with a long-winded preacher. Paul, you see, had lots of experience preaching. He preached in the synagogue back when he was a faithful leader in the Jewish tradition. And now, as a convert to Christianity, here he's preaching a Christian sermon, interpreting the scriptures to show that the Christian Jesus is, in fact, God's Messiah. Paul had a lot of material he wanted to cover, to share with these good people in the city. He also wanted to get to Jerusalem, to be there in time for this big high holy day of Pentecost. But Jerusalem was about 2,000 miles away. So he's feeling some time constraints here. And as sometimes happens when the church gathers together, the preacher that day went on maybe a little bit too long. We're told he spoke until midnight. Then he had some food, some nourishment, and he kept on going. He continued until dawn. And as I was reflecting on this passage, I thought, well, everybody admires the Apostle Paul. Maybe I should be more like the Apostle Paul. And in my experience here at St. John's, I know that you support such things because the clock on the back wall I can see says that it's only 8:40. So we got time. We got time. And I know there's a clock over there. People point it out to me, but the reflection from the windows makes it impossible for me to see it. So I can't go by that. So this is a perfect opportunity. So, let's get the Bible out. Shall we start with Genesis? This is going to be great, isn't it? Aren't you excited? Aren't you glad to be here? I would not do that to you. I wouldn't. You may be relieved to know that I've got a big watch right here on the pulpit, and the time is even right. So I will try not to go too long. I will try. So that's the first really scary thing about this passage, is that Paul talked until dawn. and they were all stuck in there with him. The second thing, which maybe you picked up on, I think you probably did, is a very serious safety concern. A child fell out of a window. His name is Eutychus. Ironically, you know what his name means? It means lucky. Lucky. So there was Eutychus sitting precariously on the sill of an open window. Why was the window open? Well, maybe the room was crowded and all the other seats were taken. We're told in this passage that there were many lamps in the room, probably because it was getting late and dark. Maybe the room was getting stuffy and he wanted some fresh air. In any case, we know that Paul was giving a long speech in a stuffy room well past bedtime. I mean, who wouldn't fall asleep, right? And sure enough, as Paul goes on and on and on, poor Eutychus dozed off and toppled right out the window. He falls 3 stories down to the ground to be picked up dead, it says. Oh no, that's horrible. It's terrible. Apparently, there weren't any screens in the windows with those very helpful signs you have talking about that say, warning, screen will not stop child from falling out window. Keep child away from open window. Don't come off either, not even with WD-40. But we don't want children to fall out windows. And of course, even though I'm making light of this part of the passage, the safety of anyone is of utmost concern. Thinking about children falling out of windows, to my mind, brings back the story of Eric Clapton's son, Connor, who was living on the 53rd floor of a condominium in New York City. One day the housekeeper was there, and she opened a 6x4 window to clean it, and little 4-year-old Connor came darting into the room, passed her to the window, and fell to his death. Horrifying, horrifying. Tragedy happens that way sometimes. Things are going along as usual, and then suddenly something horrible happens. Someone slumps forward or a cry goes out, and there's such a sense of shock, and nothing suddenly is normal at all. Here in this story in Acts, a once vibrant young disciple is dead. Everybody is stunned, speechless. Sudden death like this will do that to us. And yet, if we stay awake and listen, we hear that that's not where the story ends, right? Paul went down and, bending over young Eutychus, took him in his arms and said to everyone else, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." Into our time of shock comes a tender embrace. Paul resuscitates Eutychus. Much like other occasions in the Bible, when the prophet Elijah embraced and resuscitated the dead son of a widow. When the prophet Elisha revived the Shunammite's widow's son. When God raised Jesus from the dead. Into times of horror and pain and death, God steps in. We tend to think that where there is life and then there is death. But God flips it around. Where there is death, then there is life. Where we expected the embrace of death, we encounter the embrace of life. Where we expected a church service to turn into a funeral, Paul confidently breaks bread, eats, and continues to talk until daybreak. Why let a thing like death stop a good preacher? How about that boy, though? How about Eutychus? There he is sitting on the windowsill, getting really sleepy, and then suddenly he wakes up. Everybody's looking at him. Paul is hugging him outside He must have said, what happened? Why am I covered in bruises? He must have been dazed. Our friend Eutychus fell asleep and missed the amazing thing that God did right there to the Apostle Paul. The other people there, though, who'd been in that crowded room, apparently they had managed to stay awake and saw the whole thing happen. We're told that at the end, meanwhile, they had taken the boy away alive and were not a little comforted. Now there's an understatement. Not a little comforted. Maybe they were kind of like on the front of our bulletin covers there. Maybe their eyes kind of looked like this. You know, like cartoon characters do when something kind of stunning is happening. When you see it. Now I can sum up the Apostle Paul's sermon in one sentence. It was, do not be alarmed, because there is life. We don't have to be fearful, huddled behind closed doors. We can confidently confront the world's understanding of death by shouting the words, there is life. There is life. The next day, Paul left, heading for Jerusalem. And the congregation left that room. Sure, it had been a long sermon, but what more could a church ask of its Sunday worship than to return to the world on Monday morning, full of life and not a little comforted? They'd stayed awake for the experience and seen amazing things happen, which helped them to believe, to say, I believe. I believe God is present in this world doing amazing things, and I want to stay awake and see it happen. Now there's a reason to stay awake in church on Sunday morning. Amen.
Amen.